Hello, everyone. My name is Mia Yu, an art historian and curator based in Beijing. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to Art Basel Conversation. I'm really excited to moderate today's panel. The title is Defining Global China, Contemporary Art in China Now. A few pieces of housekeeping before we go. One, after the conversation, there will be ample time for Q&A. So please type your question in the QA box in the bottom. I will ask your question on your behalf. Two, we also have a simultaneous translation into Mandarin. So if you need it, please choose your audio channel by pressing the interpretation button. So 我们有一个这个同声传译，所以就是如果你想听中文的话，请按下面那个翻译 interpretation 那个按钮啊。This session is recorded, so and will be uploaded on YouTube soon. Three, very importantly, although we don't see you, we do feel you and we feel your presence. So let's take a moment to acknowledge there are people out there. While we are all behind the computers, we are all together sharing this time and the space now. So finally, I'd like to thank Stephanie Bailey for conceiving this panel, and also thanks to Toby Skeks for organizing and making this event happen. So now is the fun part. I get to introduce the speakers. We have three curators in the panel today. Joining us from Guangzhou is Nikita Yingqian Cai, or Cai Yingqian in Chinese. That's how we call her. Nikita is the Deputy Director and the Chief Curator of Guangdong Times Museum, Guangdong Shidai Meishuguan. So over the years, Nikita has curated numerous exhibitions, including Candice Lin, Pigs and the Poison, which is currently on view at Times Museum. She has a lot on her plate. She spearheads a research program at residency all the way south. She organized annual para-curatorial series, and she edits the online journal On Our Times. In the past few years, I have the honor to collaborate with Nikita on various projects. In fact, we just met up in Guangzhou last week for lunch. So always a pleasure to see you, Nikita. Welcome. Joining us from New York, I guess from New York, right? Andres Jaque, I hope I pronounced it right. Andres is the architect and the writer and director of Columbia University Advanced Architectural Design Program. He's the chief curator of the 13th Shanghai Biennale. The title is Bodies of Water, which is currently on view at PSA in Shanghai. Although I had never met Andres until now, I had the pleasure spending almost 7 hours looking at his show last week. Last not the least, we have Ara Qiu Yun, who joins us from Shanghai. Currently, Ara is the curator of UCCA Edge, which is the third art center in UCCA family after UCCA Beijing and UCCA Dune. UCCA Edge is going to unveil in about 8-9 days, I guess, on May 22nd. Yeah. So the inaugural show is City on the Edge, Art in Shanghai on the Turn of the Millennium, curated by Phil Tineri. So just last week, I met up with Ara, who gave me the privilege and touring UCCA before its opening, and the space and location are quite impressive. So welcome, Ara. So yeah, the panel. In today's panel, we'll talk about Chinese contemporary art today in relation to a multitude of global and counter-global processes with the different visions, perspectives, and practice. So the premise of this conversation is really based on our mutual understanding that a monolithic understanding of China and a binary conception of a global are not enough to analyze the world today. So how to imagine the global world as a collaborative network with entangled histories and epistemologies and cultures, and what is China's role in this new global or counter global in some cases. As many artists and curators take the interest to reimagine China from transnational perspective, how do we understand China beyond the boundary of a nation state? On another level, as climate crisis, environmental inequality, and COVID-19 remind us of the tension that shape the coexistence in the planet today. Is global still a useful framework, or is global going to be replaced with the concept of the planetary? So quickly, I like to point out a historical reference point, that is the Shanghai Biennale in 2000. The first official art biennale that includes contemporary art in the State Museum. It was also a time when globalization was embraced rather than critiqued. So my first round of question kind of depart from this historical landmark of 2000, and I invite you to reflect upon the historical trajectories from then to now. So Nikita, we have talked about this before. In 2000, as a college student, you visited the Shanghai Biennale, and it was your first time to experience a contemporary art exhibition. Since 2010, you have been curating and directing program at Times Museum. So could you, from your perspective, map out this global process since 2000 in the Pearl River Delta, and how this kind of global process has shaped your curatorial vision? So yeah.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself. Thank you, Mia, and thank you for Abaso Conversation to invite me to be part of the panel. And I think my mapping of this global processes had to do with my personal encounter and engagement with contemporary art in China. As Mia had mentioned, of course, the Shanghai Biennial was one of such very impressive events in my curatorial career. And it also has to be, I think, refer to the institutional trajectory of Times Museum, maybe the kind of history of Times Museum, because I think it makes sense to connect the curatorial framework, especially this image of Asia's modernization presented in the 2000 Shanghai Biennale, with maybe two other globalizations, or two other kinds of globalizations that presented. One is in the book of Greatly Forward, which resulted maybe from this urban planning interest and architectural research interest of a group of students of Harvard Design School, led by Rem Koolhaas. And the other one is what is proposed by the anthropologist Matthew Gordon, what he termed as low-end globalization, as a process of the Pearl River Delta become, I would say, the 1990s of the manufacturing center of the world, and attracted bigger communities of African traders. But I think I'm going to problematize these two kinds of globalizations. In a way, I think Rem Koolhaas' idea of the Pearl River Delta, which he defined the term, he drew reference of this historical term, Greatly Forward, which means the conversion from rice paddy fields to postmodern villas and office towers. I think it's almost like an Oriental developmentalist impression of Asia at that time, and driven by the research interests of this group of young designer and urban planner. This essentialization set Asia in contrast with this classic European ideal of balance and harmony. And Asia become the symbol of speed, not just speed, but also chaos and violence of development. And the problem, I think, for low-end globalization is strengthen this image of this binaries, a set of binaries, like between the West and the East, and also developed and developing, low and high. So in the end, I think my personal kind of my curatorial perspective in terms of developing and directing series of programs in Times Museum had to be based on a critical reflection of these two kinds of globalization. Because both Greatly Forward and Low-End Globalization prioritize the economic perspective of globalization and marginalize the creative and cultural forces and the local agencies, as well as those transnational connections that have shaped the region for a long line of history. So that is the mission I took up when I started to situate this global imaginations and processes in Times Museum's program, and to adopt a relational and comparative perspective in presenting contemporary art in China, as well as artistic practice experiments from the region. Our focus is to explore a different cartography and epistemology of the South. I hope I answered your question, but I guess I didn't repeat much about what we have been had explored in our podcast series about the Shanghai Biennial.
Yes, that's right. We did a podcast on Shanghai Biennial. We had many conversations over the year because our collaboration, and each time I talk to you, it keeps reminding me that globalization is not abstract, and your work is to resist abstractification of East or West, or this kind of binary, and kind of bring back this local agency that has been marginalized in a very kind of Eurocentric point of view. Yes, so I like to talk more about it with you, but now let's shift from Guangzhou to Shanghai, from the Pearl River Delta to the Yangtze Delta. So Ara Qiu, you represent this new generation of Chinese institutional curator. You started your curatorial career in 2015 after studying in New York. And when you came back to China at that time, it was coincides with the museum boom in Shanghai, in the West Bund. So you worked at Along Art Museum, and then Tank Shanghai as an in-house curator. And both were kind of, still are, new art institutions on the West Bund, and founded by Chinese investors and collectors, and supported by the Chinese, the district government. And you work mainly bring foreign artists, rather famous foreign artist names, to exhibit in China. And this interesting phenomenon that coincides with the beginning of your curatorial career is the rise of exhibition as a part of a cultural industry. In particular, in Shanghai, there's a mega exhibition of famous Western artists like James Turrell, Liu Song. They have become a mass spectacle and gained a tremendous commercial success. And now you start your new work at the UCC Edge, the newest museum in Shanghai's contemporary art scene. And the first exhibition is a historical retrospective of Shanghai Biennale as a landmark of a globalization of contemporary art. So based on your, I found your career trajectory is quite interesting. It also coincides with the rapid the rise of exhibition as a cultural industry. So based on all these experiences, can you critically reflect on the kind of global and local forces at play behind the mega exhibitions in the past 5 years, and what kind of enabled such a public fascination, and what is the relationship between the curatorial direction of the art institution and this rise of exhibition as an industry? Yes. So
thank you, Mia, for having me here, and thank you for asking me these very critical questions. I think I want to answer based on my personal experience. only 6 years, not very long, but yeah, I kept hearing about Shanghai, the museum boom in the last year of my stay in New York. And so it's also helped me to make this decision to come back to China after my school. And then I lived in Westbound for 6 years, and I witnessed the area, huge change in this area. So from a little bit like desolate place to now magnificent attractions for Shanghai people to spend their maybe weekends here. And then yes, I think you're right, like that there is like virus kind of force to push this this trend of the museum boom. First of all, I think the government support is very huge, such as the construction of bonded warehouse and concession on land rents, which has attracted like private collectors such as the founder of Long Museum and Tank Shanghai to land on Westbound area. And at the same time, I think those large galleries which hold expectations of the art market in mainland China collaborate with these private museums to bring exhibitions of so-called like blue chip artists to Shanghai. This collaboration can be a win-win pattern for both sides. The galleries provide artworks and production supports, and these nascent private museums provide opportunities for these works to be exposed in China to the public for a longer period and on a more substantial scale. This mature like interaction along with these cultural pursuits of the audience in Shanghai, I think most of them are post 1980s. The development of the internet and social media create a signage force which drive the rapid development of the art industry in Shanghai, from my opinion. And of course, the lack of academic ability and less emphasis on educational role of the private non-profit institutions are a weakness that cannot be ignored. The cause of this weakness can be understood as a structural one within the institution, I think, and they can be solved without constant effort and long-term pursuit of many people. I think UCCA is one of the few institutions that can step outside this framework at the moment, and we need more institutions like this for now. But I also think that the most important question is what kind of knowledge to produce. We do not necessarily only to produce knowledge in the curatorial system. In fact, I believe the most valuable knowledge is created by the interaction of the institution and the general audience. I think it's kind of our ultimate goal to expand audience understanding to arts through long-term narratives of the exhibition and museum. And I think this is like how does the audience re-examine and reconstruct their self-identities and their relationships to the external world through art and through their encounter with art is our job. So that's kind of my brief answer to your question.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Interesting. It's interesting you mentioned the blue chip artists, and you know, many of them, you know, many of the first the exhibition, the programming in the first year of these private museums are, many of them are blue chip artists represented by big galleries. So there is this this kind of sort of not so hidden relationship between the market and the programming in the private museums, especially in Shanghai. But I'm very looking forward to your first show at UCC Edge, which takes a historical perspective to look at Shanghai in 2000. Yes, so Andreas, yes, I must tell you that I spent almost 7 hours in your show in the Shanghai Biennale last week. I must tell you something about the audience. You have the ideal BNL audience in Shanghai. First, the queue was almost an hour and a half. And I have to use a special connection to get me in. Otherwise, I have to wait for almost 2 hours and miss my flight. I'm very impressed by how engaged, how young the audience are, and how engaged they are. They don't browse works and jump from work to work. They really look at works. And this is probably what I don't see that often in elsewhere. So I know you must have a very difficult a challenge in curating BNL remotely, but I also know that you have done lots of research when you could travel. And so could you first share with us on your curatorial approach of this BNL in relation to your research, your observation on Shanghai or on the Chinese art scene in general? And I have another question for you. As you said in the interview, this BNL is an opportunity to reconnect the way our bodies connect with other beings, a call for alternative and form of togetherness to be nurtured and to be called for. But when we work on the ecological interconnectedness from a planetary level, how do we reevaluate this framework of the global? Is it still useful or is it irrelevant from certain perspective? Yeah, thank you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Mia, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm really happy to be with you and also with Nikita and Ara. I really admire the work that the three of you do, and I've been following intermittently some of the works that you mentioned actually in the conversation, and I feel very, very excited about seeing the people that is behind some of the exhibitions that I so much enjoyed. Your question, Mia, is very important, and I think the fact that the audience of the Shanghai Biennale is so young, so devoted. I was also impressed to see that there's big lines of people that then spend hours looking at all the videos, watching every detail, going to all the nuances. And I had the chance to discuss with many of them there, and they were really moved and engaged with the discussions of the Biennale. And I think that's very unique and is indicating that something's happening. I don't think you could find that I live in New York, and I don't think you could find that easily at MoMA or other places. And there's something happening in Shanghai, there's something happening now in China with young generations that are incredibly engaged with art, and that they feel that art is something fundamental for them to connect to others and to be part of reality now. This is very unique, and this was actually something that the entire team of curators that have been working in this 13th Shanghai Biennale found very important. I've been working with Yumi, with Lucia Pietrogiusti, with Marina Otero and Filipa Ramos for more than 2 years. We had the opportunity to start working on bodies of water before the pandemic started and travel to Shanghai and be connected to many people there. Then everything changed, not only for the Biennale, but for all of us, right? And we've gone through a kind of huge process of reconstruction. I would say that something that we learn is how intrinsically we are connected to other beings, how our lives are shaped by the way we are porous to and infiltrated by virus, by flaws, by cultures, by financial networks, but also how we are infiltrating others, and this kind of mutual reflexivity, which is physical, it's not abstract. So I'm talking of things like breathing, that we are wearing masks, and we've been wearing masks for a long time to prevent our breathing to get into others, which is kind of an impossible project, right, as we see. And all this is challenging other forms to describe reality. And that goes to your question, Mia. Basically, I think the world of globalization, it's gone. We cannot use those terms. It's not even the divide between local and global is no longer capable of describing the realities we're part of and that are part of us. We live a world that is very different, that is basically composed in the way things get together, connected ones to others. And those threads are much more complex than just saying this is local, this is global, this is planetary, this is basically the artists that we convened and that have worked for the Shanghai Biennale have been exploring very specific ways for things to circulate, to flow, to be stagnatized. And basically they're finding new geographies that are operating there. I agree with Nikita when she was saying that there's a huge need for curators mostly to understand the way artists are reflecting and operating in other, Nikita said, cartographies and epistemologies. I agree with that, and I would say that also geographies, and I think that this is something that is happening, and probably artists are the first ones providing kind of a cultural apparatus and sensing apparatus for our bodies to be part of that. For instance, for me, and for those that visit the Shanghai Biennale, I think there's some works that are crucial in this discussion, Mia, that you're launching. First is the work of Carlos Casas in the very chimney of the power station of art, which was basically a device that prompted development, evolution, transformation, industrialization, or standardization of bodies through the very simple act of, or very complex act of releasing carbon to the atmosphere. Carlos Casas reproduced the first climatic event that was perceived around the world, that was sensed by the seismographs around the world, which is the eruption of the Krakatoa. And the eruption of the Krakatoa is crucial because in the way that Carlos reproduced that, visitors to the Biennale will be able to sense the eruption through their bodies. This planetary event, this event that is very local, because of course it affected, killed, destroyed at a very local level, but then it was also sensed in a very large area that we could even think that is planetary, because seismographs all around the world were sensing that, was doing something that was beyond the notion of the global or the local, was really transforming the way humans would perceive climate. If climate could be sensed as something that was just kind of out there, external to us. When you're there, and I don't know, Mia, if you had the chance to experience this work, you feel that your body gets balanced. And many people get dizzy even. We have to announce it, like you can feel very uncomfortable in this work. You feel that basically the floor you're standing on, the ground you're standing on, it's no longer fixed, it's flowing, it's moving. You're very vulnerable there. And vulnerable in facing nature. And this is probably what art can do now. Expand and attune our sensing capacities to the way the world is evolving, to the way crucial defiance, like climate defiance, it's becoming something that it's our own culture. And this is for me kind of what art can do now. And I want to say that this is something that obliges us to look at contemporary practices. I think, for instance, the work of Dai-Chen Lian or Kamin Gao and Chen Jiangyu or many others that are part of the Biennale are crucial on this, but also it makes us think of the history of art, right? And I'm very happy that the Biennale is also bringing back the work of Guo Fengji, for instance, or Ana Mendieta, that were anticipating these connections. I think Guo Fengji, I mean, I'm totally fascinated by Guo Fengji, and I'm very happy that we could bring a significant number of her works, because the fact that it was,
Guo Fengyi, right? The women folk drawers. Yes, Guo Fengyi. Yes.
Guo Fengji, sorry, I thank you so much for correcting my wrong pronunciation. I apologize. Thank you so much, Mia. But Guo Fengji, it's crucial for me because she was working in the fertilizers industry, and he started to be a self-trained artist when he was in her mid-40s. She was doing that as a healing practice. She was basically drawing compulsively lines, 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 as a way to healing her hands that were suffering arthritis as a result of being exposed to chemicals. Her body was shaped by something very similar to the dynamics that the fire, the chimney of the power station of art were part of. And she was doing this as an art, as a practice of self-healing. But at the same time, she was drawing these bodies that were multiple, that were shaped by the environment, that were environmental themselves, as her body was. And healing herself was the act also of producing through art and sensing and attuning with these other multiple bodies. I don't know, I have the feeling that we're in a very exciting moment for art, where we see artists that are capable of attuning with changes that are very radically making our existence evolve, and also making the way we relate to it evolve.
Yes, it makes me think that the flow or connectedness you talk about is by no means abstract or general, is contingent. It's contingent to social political conditions. So the question is how to relativize these experiences and situate into very specific geopolitical, social political situations. And I think that's what Nikita has been doing through your research programs. So in another question, just to all of you, as Andreas talked about geography, and geography is very much a key word in all of our mind. So can you, from an institutional perspective, what kind of geography that your institution want to be situated in, and what kind of clusters of geographical relationships you want to align yourself together with. So I think are we losing Nikita, or maybe Nikita, maybe you can go ahead first. Yeah, you should unmute yourself.
Yes, okay, I'm back. So last year, I think when the COVID was maybe under control after summer in China, we embarked on a trip to 4 different port cities and regions, yes, including Quanzhou, Xiamen, Fuzhou, and then finally returned to Guangzhou. So, so we think that was the moment we should step out of the museum and also maybe have a more embodied kind of research to look back, to maybe shift our perspective a little bit backward. So part of the history why we embarked on this trip was related to the port region and port cities. Historically, because there was this kind of region called Fanfa, which means areas for temporary foreign residents, especially traders. And in port cities and regions, including Hangzhou, Quanzhou, and also Guangzhou, during the Tang and Song dynasty. And in time of the maritime expansion, waves of sojourners from Canton had immigrated to metropoles in Southeast Asia. And also during the 19th century, coolie laborers had boarded boats from Macau and settled as far as in Central America, Chile, and also British Caribbean, as well as the west coast of North America. And at the current moment, I think, not just current moment, but since the 1990s, marketization and the reform and open policies, and now the recent relocation of global supply chain from the Pearl River Delta to neighboring countries such as Vietnam, continue to connect Guangzhou and the Pearl River Delta with peoples and cultures of the South. And I guess, especially after the pandemic, it has become clear that globalization does not compress space and creating a borderless world, but rather it connects often spatially, discrete places in new way. And we are drawing a map of these interconnections and encounters, which are not necessarily driven by economic interests and top-down forces, and are usually not documented by archives and data. Here, I would like to draw references to two another kinds of global processes that from two scholars that have inspired this map we are trying to draw for our emerging public. One is this idea of port city cosmopolitanism proposed by Su-Ling Louise in her book Cities in Motions. She claims that the port city in particular is an appropriate site to ground cosmopolitanism, given its status as a node within global commercial, migratory, and intellectual flows. I think we also need to emphasize intellectual flows, not just trading, right? And its ability to attract inhabitants of diverse backgrounds. Here, cosmopolitanism is not an abstract ideal, nor a condition of migration or exile, but a process of negotiation between diverse communities participating in a dynamic process. And I think the other metaphor is this term friction, illustrated vividly by Anna Singh. She claimed that it has become increasingly clear that all human cultures are shaped and transformed in long histories of region to global networks of power, trade, and meaning. And cultures are continually co-produced in the interactions I call friction. I like her terms because she called the friction an awkward, unequal, unstable, but also creative qualities of interconnection across difference. So I guess Times Museum, I personally believe Times Museum's role lies in witnessing and even documenting this kind of awkward, unequal, and unstable processes of the so-called global, but at the same time, nurturing intimacies across continents and difference, and creatively bridging understandings of diverse audiences and communities that are not constrained to the sphere of contemporary art and the border of nation states.
Yeah. What I found your approach quite interesting is you take this decentering approach to exhibition. It's not saying that you don't make a good exhibitions, but the exhibition alone as a center is a kind of outmoded model. And you do a podcast, and we also edit this online journal, which I encourage everybody to go to Times Museum to check out on our Times online journal.
Self-promotion.
Yeah,
the best
self-promotion.
opportunity to do that.
As Andres mentioned, this global as a monolithic kind of a local binary-based model is no longer valid, but it's not saying globalization does not as a historical or a process does not exist anymore. But what you're approaching is to look at the world as this multi-sided, multi-layered network of entanglement, and as you drive this research toward either trip or exhibition or writing or podcast, is to kind of unpack unpack this entanglement from different perspectives. Yeah, so back to Ara, who kind of work a lot with the younger generation of artists, and these Chinese artists, the younger generation today have a very different kind of a trajectory of a mobility. Instead of migrating from China to Euro-American centers like 20 years ago, like Huang Yongping or Chen Zhen, their travels or trajectories are multi-directional and also engaging different kind of networks. So I'm just curious from your perspective as a curator, what kind of new insights of mobilities and networks that you can reveal to us, and this also shows the kind of this different kind of entanglement network. Yeah, so go ahead, Ara.
Yes, I want to answer this question about mobility with my personal experience from a curatorial project I did in 2019. In 2019, I went to New York for a residency program at an organization called Residency Unlimited. I was a bit unsure of the future direction of my career at that time. And I believe many artists and curators choose to join residencies which let themselves to be in a nomadic state and have a short period of time to contemplate and experiment. And during the time in New York, I collaborated with my friend Vivian Qiao to form a curatorial team called Idol Studio and produced an exhibition for a young Chinese artist called Li Shuang, who is my graduate school friends. And we made this show at a space called Sleep Center, which is small space in Chinatown. And the artist Li Shuang and I went to New York because of the show. And Li Shuang, basically she's from Fujian, and she moved to Yiwu, a town in China known for its commodity markets, for her creation. And she lived there for like 3 years. And Li Shuang's artistic creation, like we can see an interesting set of trajectories. One is her observation of immaterial, like internet and media. And the other is her contemplation of physical labor and production. And for this exhibition, the name is If Only the Cloud Knows. She flew from Yiwu to join us in New York. And after the project, the three of us parted for different destinations. And since outbreak of COVID, Shuang has been wandering in different cities and countries in Europe because she was at a residency in Berlin when the pandemic started. So she has moved 13 times within this year, and but still managed to work continuously at each of her temporal shelter. And in the past 2 years, I myself have been constantly traveling as well between Shanghai and Beijing. And my partner, Vivian Qiao, in our curatorial team, will be heading to Tokyo for school this autumn. But we've been following Li Shuang's work and updating each other with our latest works and thoughts. So I think the nomadic kind of characteristic will be embedded in the creative logic of our generation, and it will probably be more fragmented comparing to that of the last generation, just like the way we capture and disseminate information nowadays. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Aura. So back to Andreas. You were in the middle of kind of a very interesting argument about geography, and I'm just interested in like inviting you to continue this thought, and how do you situate Shanghai in your imagined geographical mapping, and how does bodies of water this BNL engage conversations with the different geographies, and in particular how to relativize ecology in different contexts. I think this relativizing abstract notions or concepts are really, really important. And what kind of new insights have you gained for just by curating this BNL? What kind of insights have you gained for your ongoing engagement of a social architecture and ecology in general?
Yeah. These are very important questions, and I'm really happy, Mia, that you're raising them. The first, I must say that there's a modern divide between what is composed and movement. We see bodies and landscapes as compositions, and then let's say that are composed by assemblages of many things, and then we see movement as something different of these assemblages, as basically the displacement of existing bodies in the landscape. But this is a very, let's say, inaccurate way of conceptualizing and characterizing how the world is constructed. the divide between entities that are composed and movement or trajectories, it's a fundamental cultural problem that we have inherited from modernity. I must say that one of the centers of this Biennale is challenging this, and I will give you some examples. For instance, I think it's very important, the work of Cecilia Vicuña. And being this a Biennale where Cecilia could not travel to Shanghai, she basically contacted and identified a series of communities of women along the Yangpu River that had been basically historically engaging with wool work. They've been kind of producing some sort of wool work that was very similar, or at least related to the work of the indigenous communities of the Andean regions, where Cecilia Vicuña, that is originally from Chile, has been in touch with for many years, since the 1970s. They worked together, Cecilia, with a number of these women to produce this menstrual quipu, a device that is basically using the techniques that are very much treasured by generations of women to work with wool and with fabrics, to produce a calendar that could reflect on the cycles and the time that is shaped by menstruation. And by the way, menstruation is synchronized and desynchronized among women that are part of the same communities. This is a work that could only happen this year, or this because it requires so much time to produce this kind of transnational community of Cecilia Vicuña, her people, and the different women that were working in different communities along the Yangpu River. And the beauty of it is that when you arrive there, this installation somehow contains all this relational complexity, but it's not, let's say, based on a divide between an artist traveling, coming to Shanghai from New York or Chile, or other people moving and composing comes together. Menstruation, handwork, wool, producing this installation, not in it, so time gets physically expressed and enacted, is all part of a process where displacement, transformation, connection, trust, interaction comes together. And this intersectionality of the works that at the same time talk about time, space, relationships, materiality, it's something that, in my opinion, artists are working on a contemporary basis as a way to reconstruct the world and their relationships. And for me, these kind of kinships that are materially, spatially, temporarily constructed are probably the institutions that we could also support and empower. And these are the other institutions that official institutions can make happen and basically put in the spot and give importance. I think this is something that biennales can do, and art institutions can do, because artists are already working like this.
It's great. I really appreciate your point on intersectionality. Time goes really fast. I like to give a final question to all of you, because this is also a question that comes up in the Q&A box quite a bit. By the way, we still have 300 viewers on Zoom and many more on Facebook. So we must have said something interesting. So a question, a very serious topic on censorship. So on the one hand, we see Chinese curators and artists kind of reimagine China from a transnational perspective and take the cultural understanding of China beyond the boundary of a nation state. On the other hand, the tightened censorship keeps reminding us the power and the presence of the state. So I'm just wondering, Nikita and Andre, if you have any stories to share with us, and if you have any tactics or strategies to protect the political agencies of artists and curators while working around the censorship. Yes.
may I answer first, maybe from a local perspective? Of course, over the years, we also heard a lot of anecdotes, stories about like Shanghai Biennale. So because Mia also mentioned that we have been working on decentralized exhibitions. And what the other
Hello? Hello? Nikita? Yes, we seem to have lost Nikita. So Andres, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I mean, this is a crucial question. And I would say, working in New York, from New York, I must say that curators, artists, museum staff, cultural workers, creative industries around the world are dealing with this huge political struggle of being facing force of control and exclusion and surveillance. I must say that this happens probably not only in China, it happens in major institutions around the world in different ways. And there's, of course, all these trajectories of art scrutinizes how power infiltrates art institutions and artworks. And I think this is a struggle that probably I'm privileged in the way that I can somehow gain, by the way I can move from one context to other, the possibility of choosing where to work and often avoid high levels of control. And at the same time, I think it's very important to fight for freedom of speech and to allow artists to work politically. And I think that that was my motivation to engage with the Shanghai Biennale, because we put the focus mostly on artists and curators, but it's also people that work on a daily basis at museums and institutions that are facing this difficulty. I must say that basically there's a need to push and infiltrate and work, in my opinion, and I think that's one of the options, from inside, pushing and preventing things from happening and finding the loopholes, the cracks, and making the best of them and pushing from there, because definitely those spaces need to be occupied and be pushed for. They cannot be abandoned or silenced. In the specific process of this Shanghai Biennale, we have been working for a long time with the artists. The artists that we convened have not been just kind of invited to present something, let's say. We've been working on a long dialogue and that ended up in 33, for instance, new commissions. That long dialogue that was more than a year for almost all cases allowed to involve everyone in the museum, the education department, but also involve the Cultural Bureau in a long discussion. And I must say that all artists that we've been convening, that went through this process of dialogue, found ways to really, let's say, make their political statement go through the process. It's been really hard, I must say. There's moments of discussions, there's moments of, but somehow I feel that this is something that needs to be done and needs to be addressed realistically, knowing that those tensions also happen in other places and that we have to be vigilant. My impression is that you said that the Shanghai Biennale introduced contemporary art in the context of China at one point. And I think this Biennale is highly political in many ways.
Yes, in 2000.
In 2000?
In year 2000, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So ARA is putting together a show together with Phil Tinari on Shanghai Biennale 2000, or Shanghai, the art scene in Shanghai. And that will take place simultaneously as your show. So, has this a dialogue between the present and the Shanghai in 2000. Yeah, just a footnote. Yeah.
Yes, no, and I think that it's very important to acknowledge that this Biennale, for instance, is probably highly political in many ways. and it was possible through a permanent kind of pushing activity that probably was only possible because the Biennale was dealt with as an increscendo process, long process that brought everyone into a common discussion.
Hi, Nikita.
Hi,
Yeah,
I'm
please
back.
continue.
What a coincidence, but anyway, so
There's some
assembly,
the
this
Q&A
assembly,
asked if you just got censored.
I mean, what we mean for assembly encompass like different platforms, right? To communicate with this diverse communities and audience. So that's why we develop podcasts, online journal, and also these walks and field trips that we can actually interact with people face to face. So I believe that exhibition is not the only medium. And especially during the pandemic, I believe this role of translation as an institution and curator, it's very important. But I think kind of strategy over the years, as my experience working in Times Museum, narrative-based works, especially videos, attract particular attention. And this kind of time-based media, and also now the kind of upgrade of, I think, the censorship mechanism, especially with also full translation of subtitles and all that. And I guess non-figurative languages and material-based works might slip through the grip a little bit better. And I guess in terms of developing the description or the rhetorics of the work, I will say both institutions and curators, but also artists can maybe develop different version according to different, I think, needs or occasion. And we spend a lot of time in this second editing of work description. But also, I think there are difference between a state-run museum and also for us as a kind of privately funded museum, and we tend to stay under the radar, and we also don't attract that much. I will say 流量. I don't know. We're not a big IP, or we don't have high visibility in terms of our programming. And I think the other hand is I'm becoming a bit more, I think this coded language of contemporary art in a way has its potential in our very particular context. Since I think I will draw reference to the artist I recently worked with, Candice Lin. She was very inspired by Saidiya Hartman's term or proposition of critical fabulation, which recognizes, reimagines, and recombines basic elements of narrative to rehearse actions and words that could not have been possible in a particular time and space. So I think this coded language of contemporary art might has its potential in pushing boundary between the speakable and the unspeakable. But we do need more patience and devotions in forging the channels and keys, and also bridging these languages with our audience. And I guess this young audience will also become more mature one day, since our demographics are changing, right, in China.
Would you like to talk a little bit about self-censorship? That, you know, in terms of how artists and curators themselves kind of, or especially curators, censor works, and with like the kind of calculation, what kind of works might pass and might not pass. Is that against the, is that, you know, it's some people argue that's against the ethics of curating, but some would just argue that's just for the show survive, for the sake of a survival of the exhibition, and is necessary. Would you comment a little bit on that, on self-censorship?
I think we are always very open when we start talking and collaborating with an artist. And if it's usually based on a lot of research that we have been doing, then we'll try to be transparent. Sometimes it cannot be because we actually cannot foresee what might be in the zone of different setting of censorship. So in a way, I think it's important. We also have this obligation to our public and community. And I think it's a lack of diverse voices and also alternative curatorial perspective in terms of what museums are presenting nowadays in China. And I think this obligation is the main drive behind our negotiation with artists when sometimes disagreement or conflicts emerge. But we put a lot of efforts in making things possible. That's all we can say. And making things stay open and accessible to the public. And I think keeping such a public sphere is crucial at this moment. Otherwise, I think this is, of course, without this, there are no point of any kind of bridging of difference, right? And we stay within our border.
Yeah. Another question is about online presence. Whether or not Shanghai Biennale has online version. And of course, we cannot travel freely, and how can people enjoy your Biennale and enjoy the shows or the kind of at the Times Museum, and what kind of online presence do you have? How do you connect with the audience through internet?
Yeah, this is a very, very important question, because I think that the space that we're living in, it's multiple. And I think we have to acknowledge that art events are happening in this kind of multiplicity of the contemporary realms. The Shanghai Biennale, this 13th Shanghai Biennale, Bodies of Water, was initiated as a rehearsal, actually, in November. So when the pandemic started, we decided not to defer or to postpone or to cancel. I think that was something sort of tragic in a way, that so many artistic events and cultural events were canceled or postponed at the time that the pandemic was emerging as a problem, as a huge problem that was reshaping daily coexistence. Because the idea that artists that are only needed when things are going well, it's highly problematic. Art is part of the making of reality, as it is science or scholar work or activism. So to understand that artists could not be silenced in such a moment forced the Biennale. We wanted to put them in kind of in the center also of this moment, and we did it through basically rethinking of the space of the Biennale. And the Biennale was initiated as a rehearsal in the form of a very basic gathering that was also connected to others in the distance through collaborations with DocuTV, Bilibili, and streaming, of course. And then it moved into an ecosystem of alliances, which basically we developed strategies to work with art schools in the greater Shanghai area, to basically collaborate with many different infrastructures that were already part of the city. And now the Biennale keeps operating at different spaces. We are launching, for instance, in a few days, a series of new commissions, 9 sound pieces that will be available online. We're preparing now a virtual reality experience of the Biennale, but probably it's the sound pieces which I'm more excited about. And also we're launching 2 books now. So the Biennale keeps moving, occupying other spaces of interactions that are not really, let's say, parallel things, but are equally important venues. And that's something very important. What I'm excited about, for instance, the book that Filipa Ramos has been very intensively working on, is that it's not a reflection of the real exhibition, but it's a venue in itself. And the same happens with the 9 sound pieces that we're putting together with particular artists like Torkwase Dyson or Vera Frankel, that are going to be distributed through the eFlags platform, because they are in themselves new venues. For us, working online or working through the language of distributed publications is not really like reflecting, but rather understanding that the spatiality of the Biennale needs to be multiplied, and in each of these spaces, probably something very different needs to happen.
Ara, you want to comment on that from the perspective of UCCA? I know you have on multiple online platforms.
Yeah, we are just launching the ticket kind of program for the City on the Edge tonight. So audience can start buying the tickets through the app. And then I think from the exhibition kind of making process, I worked with this show called Immaterial Rematerial, A Brief History of Computing Art, at UCCA Beijing last year. So this show was scheduled in February kind of 2020, but got postponed for 7 months. So all the 40 artists and their assistant who working on computing art couldn't make the trip. So we did all these kind of learning process online, and our team did the installation all alone in Beijing. And I think this is from kind of a more practical process about the exhibition making. And for the kind of the institutional perspective, we now have the kind of digital analysis and digital strategy department who got these staff to working on the data and also the online process for engagement with our audience. So we have these multiple kind of channels for visitors to get the information of the exhibition, like the 小程序 on the WeChat, and we have like special kind of audio guide with the word text extended labels, and I think we are having multiple kind of live streaming programs on TikTok, on Douyin, and there's so many lines going on about the online engagement for now, and we do kind of a virtual exhibition, these programs for every exhibition archive for now. So you actually got kind of a virtual exhibition recreated online, and so for artists and curators who have a digital copy of the real exhibition.
Yeah. So we have 10 minutes over, actually. I just quickly go to Nikita for kind of last comments that as Ara and Andres are talking about digital experience. I was thinking of about this during the pandemic time, during the lockdown. We know we're on 10 Zooms every day, and this experience is quite you know, engaging, but also creates this digital flatness. So and I know during the pandemic and even now you have all these programs at Times Museum through podcast or online journal that we're doing. So could you just comment on, and also you organize travels along the port cities, so that's kind of offline. So could you talk about the importance of a digital experience and also the challenge of breaking that digital flatness?
I think it's important to not just mirror, I think, what happened in the exhibition space, as well as the physical events of the museum, and then present it online. And I think this the kind of field trip travels we initiated is also based on this kind of flatness and fatigue, I would say, of digital connection. In a way, it's I think Zoom, both Zoom and I would say virtual now, it's quite popular. A virtual presentation of exhibition, it's a limited experiences, and in connection to some of our program, like podcasts and the journal, is mostly an extension, or some of these are expanded conversations that have not been completely covered or explored in our exhibition programs. I hope that, I think that would be, because we had a very big a kind of gathering, almost like in crisis, when everyone returned from lockdown, right, last year, around March, and started to work in the museum office again. And we think that will be the end of exhibitions, because we thought that people will stop coming to museum. And in the end, after we restarted the program in August, that I think, as most of the museums in China, we actually witnessed a growth in visitor numbers. But I think we are personally inspired by a lot of other cultural makers, but also platforms of, maybe I would say, digital or activist platforms online, and this kind of volunteer translation of maybe articles or essays from humanities and social sciences. I think a lot of young scholars and maybe intellectuals have initiated that without maybe driven by an institution behind. So we thought, okay, since so many self-organized activities and translation have been done, why can the museum maybe try and do something similar? And so that's probably the idea behind some of these digital programs we develop, as well as those walks will continue to walk. And I think these experiences have been very inspiring, and the kind of friendship we foster through these trips and travels are amazing.
Thank you, Nikita. We have gone 15 minutes over time. I would like to continue this conversation. Well, you ended on a beautiful note about connection and friendship and solidarity. It is through this kind of online or offline network, and by understanding the entanglement and the network, that we are all connected, not just on one global world, but on a planetary level. So if for those of you in China, I highly recommend you visit the Shanghai Biennale. And I hope I can see you one day in China or in New York, Andreas. And Nikita, who is having another interesting show coming up. I also highly recommend everybody to log on Times Museum's website and check out the online journal that I edited with Nikita and Jianru. It's called a Constellation of Intimacies. Yeah, and yes, and Constellations of Intimacies that trace inter-Asian cultural exchange from the Cold War until the present. And Aura 2, please keep us updated on the opening of UCC Edge on Shanghai 2000. And if you're interested in Shanghai 2000, a bit of exhibition history, there's a new book that came out, Uncooperative Contemporaries, Shanghai's exhibition in 2000, that I contributed last year. So I hope we keep the conversation open and keep us in this one interconnected world. Yes, thank you very much. And I hope we'll see you soon. Yeah, in real space. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.